This week on SDC, you may think you're only one person, but Facebook now has decided that you might well be two. It's happy birthday to the password. We look at how Chinese hackers have successfully managed to attack a whole range of technologies from the likes of Apple, Microsoft, and Google. And Apple's fight against Facebook has been taking the headlines, but really it's Google that Apple has in its sights.
So it's been an interesting week this week. We've heard a lot between the Apple and Facebook battle, as we do every single week. There's something that Facebook's come out with recently that's kind of worth bringing up. Facebook used to count Instagram and Facebook users who had linked their accounts together as one person for the purposes of advertising, which makes absolute sense, right? Because you go between the two and you're the same person being targeted.
So basically, Facebook's advertising revenues were getting hammered by Apple, and Facebook's solution was to double its user numbers by counting everyone twice. Am I being too cynical, Kate?
Facebook was counting people as one, and now it's counting them as two, so that will double the amount of people that are being targeted. The thing is that because since ATT's come out, it has become very difficult to report. I find it very hard to imagine how it's really going to benefit advertisers at all, other than them thinking, well, Facebook's trying to trick us here.
I mean, I can actually sort of understand this, to be honest, because Facebook and Insta are two different platforms. So yeah, they've changed the optics of it now. They're saying, you know, it's two different things, but they are two different things, aren't they? So it's sort of understandable that they'd want to maximize the revenue from each platform.
It depends. You can't have it both ways, right? So yeah, on TV, if you want to advertise on two different channels, that's fine. But if you're doing targeted ads, you know, you can't have it both ways. If you're targeting an individual, you can't suddenly pretend that individual is actually two individuals, right? So either it's generic and it's eyeballs, or it's not generic, it's targeted, in which case everybody only gets to be counted once.
Exactly. And Facebook knows so much about users that why would making them separate make any difference at all, unless somebody's using your Instagram account, someone else is using your Facebook account. You know, there is literally no reason other than to inflate the figures.
I can see all of that, to be fair. I think it is a matter of the Apple influence, isn't it, that's hitting Facebook really hard again.
I think there's another element here that we're not thinking about. We know there's a scourge of Facebook and Instagram account hijacks and hacks. And I think in Facebook's defense, what it's saying is if your account is hacked and hijacked, then it's somebody else using the account, and that should count as a different person for ads. So if it's advertising to you and the people that have hijacked your account, why would it not count those revenues twice? I think fair play to Facebook.
So
I'm going to jump in and say that Facebook has actually come out okay this week for me, because it wasn't hacked. I've been looking at something known as the Tianfu Cup, which is a Chinese hacking competition, much in the vein of Pwn to Own. In fact, it came about because the Chinese government brought in regulation that banned domestic Chinese national hackers from taking part in foreign hacking competitions like Pwn to Own. And the results of the latest Tianfu Cup have now come out, and Facebook wasn't on the list of targeted products and services anyway. So they've escaped, but people who haven't escaped include Apple, Google, and Microsoft.
This happens every year. Every year they always get all the scalps, and you know, I guess the thing to remember is they've been rehearsing for ages. It's under controlled conditions. You know, there's a bit of smoke and mirrors in terms of exactly what they're using, but it does go to show that, you know, no technology appears to be able to withstand this kind of level of concerted attack.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a point to be made that yes. So back in June, the targets were released to entrants, so they know which platforms, which products they've got to try and hack, but they've still got to do it live on stage. So yeah, they've got months to prepare, but actually doing those exploits, they get 5 minutes each, 3 5-minute slots to try and perform that exploit. And the winning team, which Kunlun Lab, scooped 654,000 dollars in prize money this year, and they're a newcomer. This is the first time they've been to the competition. Although their founder was the former CTO of Kihan 360, who are famous for doing well in these competitions. And that was for hacking an iPhone. It took an iPhone 13 Pro running fully patched iOS 15.02, and they did a remote code execution via vulnerabilities in mobile version of Safari in 15 seconds. In pretty much 1 or 2 seconds, the second team, which are Team Pangu, made the highest amount of money ever awarded by Tianfu Cup, which was $300,000 US. Again, for hacking that same iPhone 13 Pro. But this time they did a jailbreak, the first jailbreak of iOS 15, using a zero-click exploit. There's also a slight problem here in that the last couple of years, we know that there have been reports that although the vendors were notified of the vulnerabilities and the exploits used, these exploits also then got used by the Chinese state actors.
There is definitely that angle, isn't there? You read Chinese hackers have done it, and it's in China, and there's that edge in terms of the level to which the Chinese government may either have inside information in terms of what's going on, or what's going on behind the scenes. So that's definitely got an edge.
These were pretty much all remote code execution exploits or privilege escalation exploits. And we should also mention that Windows 10 was hacked 5 times. Adobe PDF Reader was hacked 4 times. Parallels VM was hacked 3 times. There was an Asus router that was hacked twice. Microsoft Exchange was hacked once. And so these are things that can be used. Remote code execution is pretty serious. The jailbreak was a zero-click. These are serious things. Only 3 targets went unhacked throughout this entire competition. And that was a Synology network attached storage device, Xiaomi Mi11 smartphone, and an unnamed Chinese domestic electrical vehicle. We don't know who it was or what it was, they wouldn't say. But they were the only 3 things that have come out of this without being hacked by these elite hackers.
So I'm sure there's nothing spurious about the fact that Chinese technology survived Chinese hackers in a Chinese hacking competition, under the guise of the Chinese government, which had banned Chinese hackers from going to non-Chinese competitions to make sure the hacks took place in China. It sounds completely fine to me.
And the fact that these things make so much press every single time. I mean, it looks great again for them, doesn't it? I mean, US press, UK press, global press, really, of these competitions. We're talking about it now. So, it does make you look good.
I forgot to mention as well that Google Chrome was hacked as well by the same Kunlun Lab team that won with a 2-step remote code execution that gave or 2-step exploit that gave them privilege escalation at a kernel level. So, serious stuff. And that's why this gets reported a lot.
I mean, we've talked about it before, which is, Apple's clearly got both Google and Facebook in its sights. Facebook is a fantastic lightning rod for Apple. Facebook almost can't help itself. But if you actually step back from it, Facebook is an advertising giant, so what it does, right? And Apple has cracked down on some of the data harvesting and tracking that takes place on its devices that frustrates Facebook's revenue. But actually, Google is far more stitched into people's everyday lives. Chrome's the most used browser. Gmail is the most used mail platform. It dominates search with Apple's complicity in terms of Google pays Apple, as you've talked about before, Kate, to be the default search engine on its devices. So I think, if you're an Apple user, the reality is you probably should be more concerned about Google than you should be about Facebook. It's far easier to switch off Facebook's tracking than it is Google's tracking. Google's tracking sits behind 75+% of web trackers. You've got an account that sits behind the scenes. It dominates search. These are really hard things to get away from. And I think a couple of things that we're looking at. One is just less headline grabbing, but the efforts that Apple are making or is making to to turn off some of this Google data harvesting, notwithstanding the relationship between the two. The other one that's really interesting is Apple has clearly made a decision between Facebook and Google when it comes to messaging, and it's favoured Facebook. And what's really interesting is over the last few years, 2 or 3 years, Google has really taken on board driving SMS 2.0. So the RCS, so kind of rich communication services, so the rich text version of SMS that will be on phones by default. Google has kind of driven that forward, and it sits behind Google Messages now, and that's giving you all the rich text features. But also now we've got limited encryption and all the rest of it. This is supposed to be, or it is set up as a cross-platform, cross-network standard, just like SMS. It should be on everybody's device, but clearly it isn't, because Apple is folding its arms and refusing to adopt RCS for iMessage. And what that means is that you can't have cross-platform secure messaging within the network, if you like. You have to go outside to some kind of third-party application. Now, the reason Apple's doing that, one can surmise, is because iMessage is very sticky. Same reason it turned down the opportunity to create an iMessage Android client, because it believes that if you're a family, you'll give the kids cheap Android devices if you can message them, but because you're all on iMessage, then they will have expensive iPhones, the theory, right? Now, what's interesting in that is the winner out of Apple's refusal to put LCS into iMessage isn't just Apple keeping iMessage sticky, it's clearly Facebook, because the two biggest messaging platforms are WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And both of those do operate cross-device, cross-platform, cross-network, and Google cannot compete with those across Android, which is by far the biggest operating system, on which WhatsApp is dominant, and Google can't possibly compete with WhatsApp until Apple open it up. So, in my view, I think Apple's come under a lot of antitrust pressure recently in terms of, whether it's App Store or anything else, in terms of opening this operating closed shop. I think this is an area where users are being disserviced. It is clearly better for you as users if RCS is added to iMessage. So you can use iMessage if you're doing so, communicate with people on Android securely and with rich text. Apple, there are no good security or technical reasons for its refusal. It is purely commercial and, in my view, a selfish thing to do. And I think that's something that should be more discussed.
Yeah, people tend to forget the commercial side of Apple, don't they? First of all, your point about Google, yet they forget that Google's got 3 services that it can combine together that often people do use. There's Chrome, there's Google Search, and there's Gmail. You can combine your information across that and find out a lot about somebody. So that's kind of on the one side of things. Apple has been very much publicly targeting Facebook, as we've talked about many times before, even within this podcast, many times. But on the other side, Apple does have its own commercials. We can't lie about it. It's not just like some hero that's out there to kill the other big companies that are invading our privacy. And as part of that, Apple actually has its own ads. And we've found out recently some figures that have shown us that Apple ads have really taken off since they've been suppressing Facebook's ads with app tracking transparency. So really interesting times there. It's probably worth noting that Apple's ads are within the App Store, so it's not the same as the web ads that we're targeting the tracking across other services with ATT.
Yeah, I think I should step in here with something completely different and say happy birthday to uppercase Y, 0, lowercase u, because the password is 60 this year. That's actually slightly older than me, can you believe it? Actually, depends how you look at it, I know, because there's an argument to be made that the Romans used passwords in their military campaigns. But if we look at it in the world of technology, then I'm going to get the name wrong, pronounce it wrong, but it's Fernando Corbato, who's the father of the password. And he developed it as part of the much remembered, we all remember the compatible time sharing system, CTSS, operating system coming out of MIT in 1961, which was the first computer system to actually use a password login control. And I think we should say happy birthday to the password. You're 16 now, time to die. Whilst we talked a lot about passwordless systems, there's been some moves that are trying to make things truly passwordless, like the thing from Microsoft where your Microsoft account can be protected without a password at all now. Most systems that go passwordless, that use a different method of authentication, of identification, still for fallback, for backup, go back to a password. So there's still a password underlying there, underlying the protection. And that's the weakest point of the lot.